Welcome, all of you who are joining us for the first time. This is a little instructional video on how to read the expected edge sports baseball chart. I'm here with the creator of the baseball model, Riley Wichmann. He's also the creator of all of our models at Expected Edge Sports, and he's going to provide his expertise on the model. How you doing, Riley?
Doing well. I'm just glad that now we have a season ahead of us here. So it's good to be back and really excited to get going again.
Yeah, you and me both. So as you guys can see, we have this overview model broken up into a couple different sections. This first section is just the details of the game, the date, the time, the rotation number, and the team name. The second part is the pitchers. So starting pitchers are a bedrock of baseball and of our formula. So our formula, our model, our model is intensely driven by starting pitching, and starting pitching is very important to us. And we think that it's worth highlighting here. Here are the starters, their handedness right here. And then XIP is the amount of innings that we're expecting them to pitch that game. These innings are a little bit off because this is for a spring training game. But during the regular season, most starters, unless it's a bullpen game now that's become in vogue, sometimes those will be 1 or 2 innings. But most of the time, the starters will have projected between 4 and 6 innings, depending on who it is. This next column is our projection for how many runs the team will score in that particular game. So here we have Pittsburgh projected to score 3.4 runs, and the Yankees projected to score 5.4 runs. My next column is probably my favorite column. This is what we project runs plus hits plus errors to be for both teams for a 9-inning game. And this is one of my favorite props to bet, runs plus hits plus errors. This part of the model is something that Riley, his expertise has been poured in, and it took quite a long time to come up with these numbers. Riley, do you want to explain this particular portion? This is this expected edge sports starting pitching, relief pitching, and fielding. These are the defensive metrics, so run suppression. Riley, how does this work?
Yeah, so essentially we're pulling a couple of sabermetrics here to calculate each of these ratings. And just for me personally, I mean, the philosophy remains the same across all of our models, but we try to isolate those ratings that are the most predictive. So we don't want, I don't want noise. I don't want 7 different ratings going into, your fielding rating. But we try to isolate the ones that are the most predictive. I'm not going to highlight exactly which ones we use for each one, but it's kind of the secret sauce. But starting pitching here, a 71 for Garrett Cole essentially represents that he is rated 29% better than average as a pitcher in terms of preventing runs. So it's all scale to 100. So any rating above 100 means that essentially they will be allowing more runs than average compared across the board for starters. And then this is all relative to the time you're pitching now too. So for example, Garrett Cole projected to pitch 6 innings here. That 71 is a lot more impactful than if he was, for example, Garrett Whitlock, who has been more of a reliever, but starting for Boston today anyways for the spring training game, a 1.5. That 78 is a lot less impactful because he's only pitching for an inning and a half, essentially. So that's kind of how to interpret that sort of information. And then off of that, there, the starter, we have the reliever or the relief rating, and that's also going to be impacted by the amount of innings that the starter is projected to pitch. So obviously, for example, Garrett Cole projected to last much longer than Quintana. So we'd expect that, less relief is going to be needed for Garrett Cole, and thus that relief rating isn't impacted by that. But for Pittsburgh, for example, here, that 110, that's really going to impact the runs that they're expected to allow, because that relief rating that they're going to have to cover based on the fact that Quintana is only expected to pitch 2.7 innings, they're going to have to cover the rest of the game for him. So that's like the simple way to interpret all of that information. But certainly the expected innings pitch has a huge role to play. The starting pitcher rating has a huge role to play, and it all kind of comes together. The fielding rating is a little bit less impactful. I mean, it's still weighted the same way in terms of impacting runs, but as you can tell, the ratings are a lot less closer to average in general. I mean, St. Louis is really the only team that has a significantly better fielding rating than the rest. And they have a couple of really, really quality. You just think of them off the top of your head. You have Harrison Bader, you have Nolan Arenado, you have a couple of guys in that lineup that are significantly better than average that make that rating a little bit better than the rest. But everyone else in general, fielding rating is going to be less impactful, and just kind of using your intuitive sense throughout the course of the game. Sure, there's going to be some errors or some run saving plays, but in general, the pitching is going to be a lot bigger of a weight on the overall outcome of a game. So that's kind of it for the defensive side of things.
Okay, so let me recap here. These are the run suppression numbers, starting pitching, how good your starting pitcher is, how good your relief pitching is, and how long we expect them to pitch, and how good the fielding is. And this is all based on a 100 scale. So 100 here for the San Diego relief pitching, we're expecting that's exactly average, right, Riley?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but all scaled to 100 just makes it easy to read and interpret.
So 100 for run suppression is average.
Mm-hmm.
If you are below 100, like Garrett Cole here, we expect you to suppress runs better than average. And in this case, he has a 71. So we expect Garrett Cole to suppress runs 29% better than an average starting pitcher, right, Riley?
Yeah, and I mean, you can look through the list. There's a couple other good examples in here. I mean, DeGrom's supposed to be pitching today. Frankie Montas, all pitchers that, just using your logic and just your knowledge of sabermetrics in general would make sense that they would be significantly better than average. I mean, Cole was kind of up and down last year, but Charlie Morton's pretty low. Yu Darvish is pretty low still. So just kind of looking through the list, I mean, using the eye test, it does add up as well. It's not just our pure numbers, and I'm going to be using intuition as well when it comes to actually making these final plays too, because there's a lot of other factors outside of what we've included here. So, but that kind of sums up the defensive side of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for the defensive numbers, the lower the better. The lower the number, the better that team is at suppressing runs in that particular area. Next, we move on to the offensive numbers. These four columns right here are the offensive numbers. And in this case, it's the reverse, right, Riley?
Yeah, same logic, but just the higher the number, the greater amount of runs we'd expect them to create in terms of the overall offensive rating, and then in terms of the ground balls and walks. Just the higher the number, the more of that category where they're expected to generate. So, a 121 ground ball rating that the Toronto Blue Jays have, they're expected to generate 21% more ground balls than the average team. Same with walks, just all the same logic, except, for example, ground balls can be interpreted as a bad thing, where walks are obviously beneficial. And then same thing goes with power. That's more of an isolated power focused rating itself. So that one itself doesn't have the most impact on final numbers, but is still, used within our model. So that's the logic there. So very similar logic, everything's scaled to 100, except in this case, especially with the overall rating, the higher, the better offense.
All right, let me take you back to this expected edge sports offensive number. What does this number entail?
Yeah, so that's the main number that we use to adjust and project the final team total. And that's going to be everything encapsulated into one final number here, essentially, where it's adjusted for, right versus left-handedness, the pitcher, the venue, everything is being pulled in to essentially predict this final number, because that number itself is going to be a huge factor in actually projecting that final run total. So that's the final offensive number. This is including lineups, So all the batters are going to be adjusted for the pitcher they're facing, the relief they'll be facing at some point throughout the game, how long that relief is going to be faced. Like I mentioned, the venue. The one factor that I don't have embedded within this, that this is kind of where I use my own intuitive nature to determine the effect of on it, in each game is the weather, because obviously, the wind and whether it's raining or not will also affect this final number. But unfortunately, I do not have that embedded within the model yet. But everything else, basically, you can think of is going to be going into this final number. And in terms of the ratings you see on this page here, this is what it's going to look like on a day-to-day basis. But the numbers, like the actual, quantifiable numbers on this page, are going to be a little skewed, like you mentioned earlier, because of spring training. So right now, essentially, this is, your strongest lineup versus whatever given pitcher is pitching on this Sunday for spring training. So that's why the numbers are a little bit wonky. And same with fielding. It's like that's your best lineup, and obviously teams aren't going to be able to field their best lineup today, but also there's going to be injuries and all of that affect things. So this is like the optimum lineup as of right now, March 27th, that these numbers are representing.
So Riley, are you telling me that for these offensive numbers, we have the lineup from that day, basically?
Yeah, that's a huge factor. I mean, because within baseball, especially more than almost any other sport for me, it's the pitcher versus batter isolated matchup is probably the most important thing. So lineups are hugely important. So we're going to have, and it's not going to be perfect every day. I mean, there's going to be last second changes. There's going to be injuries that, maybe we don't know about, but yes, and essentially lineup accuracy will be a huge factor. And we're going to try to have the lineups, correct for each given day, because that will certainly play a part on the final numbers.
Great. This expected edge sports ground ball number.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the more ground balls a team can generate from the opposing or the more ground balls a team hits into, the less runs they're going to score. Is that what it is?
It's not exactly correlative from my knowledge, but my interpretation, the model's interpretation of this number is, yes, the higher, the worse in this case scenario. But this, once again, the most important number to think about here is offense, ground balls and walks, and the power ratings. They all come into play, but it's less direct than the offensive rating. So these are more just representative numbers of the amount of ground balls and walks and isolated power that a team has. So that's how to think about those three. If you really want, if you want your be all end all offensive rating, that's where your EES offense overall is that's the one to pay attention to. If you want a little bit more detail on team style or team characteristics, that's where you start to look at ground balls, walks, power, and then you can even dig into the other factors that we're going to talk about in a little bit here.
So this ground ball number for the Cubs here being at 113, does this say that they hit into ground balls 13% more than an average team?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So really the higher the number here, the worse for the team in theory.
Yeah, which is exactly why the conditional formatting is the opposite in this case scenario, where every other one is an offense is higher to lower, green to red. In this case, the higher the number, it goes red to green. So that's why that one is different than the rest.
So in our models in general, not just the baseball model, but for all of our models, red generally means bad, green generally means good.
Yes, and we'll explain we'll talk about the edge too, but in some cases it does mean higher versus lower. But yes, in the ratings case, absolutely. Red means bad in terms of your offensive ratings. Green means good, and then vice versa for the defensive ratings. So that's the easiest way. If this is for if you just want to take a quick glance at the model, you're just kind of going through. That's why we have the conditional formatting there. It's not just to make it necessarily look pretty. It's to help your eyes a little bit because it becomes a little bit jumbled and harder to read when you have just numbers, and especially if you're not quite as well versed in, the EES formatting. So that's the reason why that's there. And that's why, you'll see it throughout our models that we have the same concept applied.
So let me ask you about one more thing here. So these red numbers in the walks column,
Mhm.
is this saying that this team just doesn't draw many walks or is not expected to draw many walks?
Yeah, and it's based on the matchup. So it's, yeah, like you said, not expected to draw any walks. It's probably the best way to put it, because, let's say, just using simple logic, you have a team that is maybe average in drawing walks, but coming up against a pitcher who is excellent at pitching against lefties. And for some given reason, they have a bunch of lefties on the day in their lineup, and those lefties that they have in the lineup, don't draw a lot of walks, but maybe their team rating is average. That number is going to be adjusted downwards for the fact that, hey, they're coming up against a pitcher who has a high strikeout rate and a low walk rate. Just using logic, we expect that number to be lower than average. So that's yes, it's very much adjusted the same way that all these other numbers are adjusted for your pitcher and your relievers.
So I want to make that clear for everybody watching the video, trying to figure out how this model works. These numbers are all correlated to matchups, which I don't think a lot of models actually do that I know of, at least none that are available for sale. I don't think that they actually correlate as much to matchups. I think they are more static and they're more day-to-day. And certainly something that I would produce would be more static. But the fact that these are so dynamic and they're so correlated to matchups, I think it's a huge bonus of our baseball model, and we're very proud of it. And I think you did a great job here, Riley. Let's finish up real quick. Park factors. Is this how much a park contributes to runs?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So that's going to affect your total. And once again, here it's really not true to form, because we have spring training games in which these clubs aren't actually playing in their actual home stadiums. But once again, this is very much more representative of what it's going to look like on a day-to-day basis once we hit opening day. So, for example, if you're playing at Yankee Stadium, they have a park factor of 98, so that's 2% below average. And if you compare it to some of these other ratings, once again, it's not going to be as big of a weight as, for example, the starting pitcher. And if you just think about like what's most important about a baseball game, what really influences the game, the actual park you're playing in probably going to have less of an influence than the quality of the starting pitcher, for example. And that's reflected in these numbers here. But they're fairly close to average, fairly close to 100. But there still will be an effect on those final team totals and also the actual game total. So yes, and it's the same logic used for the umpires. They're just not embedded within this.
Right. We don't have any umpire information for spring training right now, but during the regular season, we try to load as much umpire information as we can access. This seems to be elusive up until when you get closer to game time. So it's hard to get the ump information super early, but when we can, this will be loaded up with the particular umpire that's expected to umpire that game. And we also have umpire ratings. These umpire ratings, the average would be 100, and then lower if you had an umpire with like a 95, then he would suppress runs 5% better than an average umpire. If you had an umpire with a 105, he would suppress runs 5% worse than an average umpire. So if you're looking for under umpires, the lower the number, the better. For over umpires, the higher the number, the better. And they're a little bit tricky to nail down, but we try to get them in the model as often as we can. Now we move on to the next portion of the overview chart. This is highlighted in yellow. This is going to be how we formulate our recommendations. So if there is a significant discrepancy between what the market line is and what our predictive market line should be, it will trigger an edge for us. And the edges will be located right in these two columns where it says side edge and total edge, you can see that there's some triggers that come up here. And then Riley will take a look at these on a daily basis. And we will come up with whether we want to issue a recommendation on these plays, whether we want to make it an official recommendation based on the numbers and also based on situational awareness. And this will be, a daily issue. So if we issue a play and, things change, the starting pitcher changes, things like that, that play will be off. If you don't have a book that allows for listed pitchers as opposed to action, sometimes you're going to be in a situation where the starting pitcher gets pulled. Our numbers are obviously going to change because it's heavily weighted towards starting pitching, and your play is still going to be action. So at that point, you can determine whether you want to let it ride or you want to just juice out of the play. But if you have a book that allows for listed pitchers, if that pitcher gets pulled, you just get that money. It's a no bet basically, and you get that money refunded. I found, I don't know about you, Riley, but when this does happen, it's pretty much a wash at the end of the year. So even if you do have an action book instead of a listed pitchers book, if you don't have access to a listed pitchers book, I would say that it's kind of a wash for how often it really happens and how often it really goes against you as opposed to for you. Usually it's not that big of a deal, but just to give you guys a heads up. Okay, if you guys have any questions on how the model works, feel free to hit us up via email. My email is pony@expectededgesports. Riley's email is Riley, RILEY @expectededgesports. If you have questions about the model, about the product, anything like that, please feel free to hit us up. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that you're using the model on a daily basis. And if you're not, I welcome you to come and join our community. We have a like-minded group of sports bettors, and we enjoy each other's company. We discuss these things all throughout the year in our Slack forum. And Riley's also in there too, along with myself. And our members also put out suggestions based on this information. So, and a lot of times that's been valuable to us as well. Riley, thank you for all your hard work. This is beautiful. And I hope that it produces many, many units for us this year.
I appreciate it. Excited to get going.
All right. Take care.